A long time ago, nobody knows quite when, the first storytellers began telling the first stories. Some say it was when our ancestors began cooking their food on open fires 1,000,000 years ago. They imagined them sitting together, communicating memories of hunting exploits, and talking about how they chanced upon some valued plants. Others say there were no stories until our ancestors were fully modern, with complex languages and rich cultures. Either way, the first tales told must have been simple ones. Someone would have talked about their day, or perhaps sung about it. Someone would have understood them, and both would have found delight in the sharing of experience. As time went by, generation upon generation sitting round the fireplace every night, the stories grew into tales of adventurers, of lovers, tricksters, chiefs, of wise old women, and of the origin of the sun and stars. It is only here, once story acquired this richness, that it influenced the archaeological record, for up until 80,000 years ago, the shape of people's hand axes would remain unchanged for hundreds of millennia. Then, on the southern tip of Africa, there emerged all of a sudden bone needles, glue made from ochre and gum, seashells strung into necklaces, and decorated ostrich eggs. Even the way stone was heat-treated to help it flake was new. A wave of innovation began that brought with it cave painting and long-distance trade, a wave that carried our ancestors all over the planet. There are archaeologists who believe this wave of innovation was sparked by a genetic mutation that unlocked a latent ability for complex language. Some people want a physical explanation for everything. A better explanation is that it was advances in the way people talked and listened to each other that made the difference. The First Enlightenment Conjecture holds that it was a new culture of storytelling that made the wave of innovation possible, that listeners became expert audiences who led speakers to use their narratives for imaginative inquiry. Stories became arenas for original thought. Speculation and planning were woven into the make-believe. Insight followed insight. The archaeological record shows an increase in population density shortly before the wave of innovation began. People would surely have spent more time talking to one another. They could easily have learnt to use story in new ways. In its formal version, the First Enlightenment Conjecture details 4 prerequisites for arenas of original thought to function well, all of which are likely to have been present when the wave of innovation began. The first is a comfortable environment for talking in. Our ancestors had already been sitting round fires for hundreds of thousands of years, so this factor will have been present. The second is open questions. Questions that don't look for specific answers, but instead invite a person to think on their feet and find something to say about an area of life that, if the question is a good one, is important for the storyteller. Open questions hand over control of the conversation. The third prerequisite is attentive listening. Attention creates an inviting space for a person to fill with their stories or with other thoughts, with any ideas about how things are or how they could be. The final factor is body language. Our ancestors must have used their physical expressions as well as their words to encourage each other to think freely and talk expansively. When our ancestors were truly paying attention, their body language would have revealed it. At iCoaching, we've adopted these 4 factors and used them as a basis for our 4 audience tools. These tools form the foundations of all that a coach offers. When the tools work well together, a space for creative thought opens up. Coaches become able to have insight into whatever it is that the coach has encouraged them to talk about. We developed the audience game as a way to learn to use these tools. It is a 3-person game. 2 people at a time play the role of audience, while the third plays the storyteller. The audience members take a moment or two to discuss how they can offer the storyteller a good audience experience, while the storyteller prepares themselves to talk openly and freely about a subject of their choice. One of the audience members then times a 10-minute round. During play, the storyteller enjoys the luxury of being heard and understood, while the audience members experiment with the tools. You should finish with a review, a discussion that thinks back on what happened during the game, then thinks big, seeking connections, and finally thinks forward to what people will do in the future. There are written instructions for the game. Good luck.